suicide isn't really relevant to the gun issue.
But to go and think that some type of gun control regulations that are being talked about are going to stop somebody from committing suicide when there's so many other ways for people to commit suicide.
But the methods that people use are important because suicide attempts often stem from temporary crises. The vast majority of people who survive suicide attempts don't end up dying from suicide, but guns make it nearly impossible to get that second chance. The victims of gun suicides are overwhelmingly men and mostly white. And the rate of gun suicides has been increasing in the US. At the same time, the rate of gun homicides has been decreasing, especially since the 90s when crime rates in general were higher. But if you compare the US to other developed countries, it doesn't look like good news. These are homicides adjusted for population size. The US would probably have a higher homicide rate even without guns, but you can see how gun violence pushes that rate far beyond the other countries here. The victims of these shootings, they're not the ones you often see on the national news. They're disproportionately young black men.
You guys can leave here and go on with your lives, but we gotta go on to empty rooms because our children's lives were taken away by people who should not have had guns anyway.
One possible explanation is that the US simply has more crime than those other countries. But if you set aside homicides for a moment and look at rates of burglary or assault, you don't see that same spike that you see with homicide. It's not that America has much more crime. It's that crime in the US is much more lethal. Altogether, the number of gun deaths in the US from 2000 to 2013 exceeds the number of Americans killed by AIDS, by illegal drug overdoses, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and terrorism combined. It should be clear by now that this level of gun violence is a uniquely American problem among the developed world. And here's one reason why. There are a ton of guns in the US. This chart shows the estimated number of guns by country. It's adjusted for population size, and it's still not even close.
The question that I would like to ask is how on earth could he compile 13 guns? How can that happen?
If you take a look back at the 10 countries with the highest levels of human development, you can see that it's really easy to get a gun in the US. All of the other countries require a license to purchase most guns, and those purchases are recorded into an official registry. To get that license, people have to state a reason for why they want a gun. And in most of these countries, they have to pass a safety test and are required by law to store their guns safely. In part because of its lax laws, there are well over 300 million guns in the US, and counting. This chart doesn't reflect private sales, but it shows the number of background checks, which all federally licensed dealers have to run. It suggests that the demand for guns has been increasing steeply since Barack Obama took office. So we've looked at gun deaths and at gun ownership. This chart puts them together. It shows that among highly developed countries, the more guns in a country, the more gun deaths. You can see that countries like Switzerland, which have relatively more guns than a country like the Netherlands, also have a higher gun death rate. And here's the US. Likewise, US states with more guns have more gun homicides. There are outliers like Idaho, which has higher rates of gun ownership but low rates of gun murders. But overall, there's a correlation between gun ownership and homicide rates. And that relationship has held up in studies that control for things like poverty, unemployment, and crime. The correlation between gun ownership and gun deaths is even stronger for suicides. It makes sense. Depression with a gun is more dangerous than depression without one. Likewise, fights, domestic disputes, road rage, drunkenness, all much more dangerous with a gun than without. That said, you might need different policies to keep guns away from potential mass shooters than you would to keep them out of inner city gangs or out of the hands of someone who might hurt themselves. America doesn't have a gun problem. It has several of them.
Let's welcome to the stage Jamira Burley, Senior Campaigner of Gun Violence, Criminal Justice, and Human Rights.
I feel like I'm on a game show with that music in the background. Thank you all, I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, you got to have a little bit more excitement than that. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you, sir, in the back. You get all the cool points. As mentioned, my name is Jamira Burley, and I have the huge responsibility of being the senior campaigner for gun violence and criminal justice at Amnesty International. And while that job may seem very unsolvable and big and unreachable goals, the work cannot be done without the individuals in this room. So I appreciate you all taking the time to attend this session, and for all of you to say that gun violence is a priority for you and you're willing to be a part of the conversation. Thank you. So throughout this panel, I want you to use the hashtag #OurWorld. Ask your questions, share your views, because there are many people in this world who don't have the privilege to be in this space. It is important for us to share the messages that are learned, the information, but also continue to echo why gun violence is a major issue in the United States and around the world. Now, it's very rare when you turn on the TV, you pick up the newspaper, you check your Twitter feed or Facebook wall, that you don't hear about a mass shooting in a mall, a movie theater, in a supermarket, in a church, or in a school. It's very rare that you don't hear about a young man losing his life from walking home from school or just standing on the corner, or even being stopped by the police. Gun violence is a growing epidemic in America, and because of the lack of legislative action taken by our government, it continues to hold America at gunpoint. 30,000 people are killed every single year. Additional hundreds of thousands are impacted or wounded mentally and physically. And who pays the cost? We do. You do. Now, I don't know if it's lucky or you're just not so lucky, but a few of you got orange cards when you came in the room. Can you stand for me? So 30,000 people are killed every year due to gun violence, 90 a day. Of that 90, 2/3 are suicides. More than 33 of them are homicides. You represent those 33 people. Random individuals going throughout their lives who are impacted and a lot of times killed by guns. So I want us to take a moment and recognize that there are empty seats in here for those individuals, and we could very well be one of them too. You can sit down now. Thank you. Now, throughout the next hour or so, we'll bring a panel of experts, 2 directly impacted individuals from Philadelphia and Chicago, and a research specialist from our international secretariat. We're going to ask them a round of questions, then we're going to open it up to you, the audience, to give us your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, because this is a continuous conversation and a dialogue between not just us within Amnesty, but also within our members, our supporters, and the individuals we represent. Because gun violence is not just an issue in America, it's a human right violation that is happening, and the government has a responsibility to do something. We have a responsibility to do something. So if you can all join me in welcoming our panelists up to the stage, we can get started. Now, I promise I'm not tweeting if you see me on my phone. It's a millennial thing. My notes, my questions are all here. But again, that doesn't stop you from tweeting, taking pictures, and Instagramming. But I do want to take the opportunity to briefly introduce our panelists, and we're going to open up with a round of questions. And they're all going to be giving answers based on their own unique perspective. I mean, we have a researcher here, a former prosecutor, well, a former gangbanger turned prosecutor. I've known Kevin for a while, so I can call him that. And then we have Camilla from Chicago, who has lost more than 24 people actually due to gun violence in the last 10 years in Chicago. So it's pretty dire situation. And so I want to start with a very simple question, I guess we can say. What is the state of gun violence from your unique perspective? And if all of you can just briefly also introduce yourself and give a little information about your background. I could, but I would probably not do justice to it. And we'll start with you, Patrick.
Thanks. I think my unique perspective is as a kind of outsider on this issue. I've worked for many years on gun violence and public security issues in Brazil. And then more recently, I'm working at the International Secretariat on the military security and policing team, and we look at gun violence and arms trade issues around the world. But I guess from that outsider's perspective, it does seem like a bizarre situation to have a country that's awash with weapons, that has a chaotic regulatory system, that has very high homicide and suicide, accidental death rates in comparison with comparable countries, but seems to be stuck in this logjam of policy inaction, obviously co-opted by very strong lobbyists for the gun industry, and which has gummed up the federal and some state systems. And it's a tragedy that so many people are needlessly losing their lives, and that the authorities, be they federal or state, are not stepping up to the plate and taking responsibilities for violence reduction and protection of individuals.
If Patrick is going to describe himself as an outsider, I guess I would have to describe myself as an insider. First, as an individual who was directly affected by gun violence. I think I lost my first friend to gun violence when I was in about the 6th grade. And then dealing with the trauma, one of the things that happens with gun violence is that it becomes normalized. TV, movies, music, people think that, to other people that is life imitating art, but to me it was always art imitating life. When we listened to that music because we could relate to it. I myself, I went the wrong route and became a drug dealer, and that, the old saying that, there are only 2 ways to get out of the drug game, dead or in jail. I was shot 5 times in December of 2006. So after getting shot, bullets hurt. I decided that I wanted to go to law school and finish my college degree. And the thing that gets me really passionate is gun violence. And the way that I felt that I could have the best effect on gun violence was by becoming a prosecutor. I worked as a public defender for a while and didn't really like the manner in which I was engaged in the system. I wanted to help end gun violence. I lost a lot of friends to gun violence. And from there, once I became the guy on gun violence, I kind of made it also a policy perspective, which resulted in my involvement in not only prosecuting individuals for gun violence. I was assigned almost every child who was shot by an adult in the city of Philadelphia for about a year. I then moved on to prosecuting cases that involve police-involved shootings. Police-involved shootings are cases where an individual was shot by the police, and most of the time I was not prosecuting the police officer, I was prosecuting the individual who was charged with a crime despite having been shot by a police officer. Sometimes those individuals had firearms, sometimes those individuals grabbed the police officer's gun while the crime was going on, during an assault, or during you see the escalation where, we used to say that, and I used to advise police officers all the time, if you see 2 kids fighting on the street and they're both emotionally unstable, don't introduce your gun to that dispute, because that typically means that you're going to have to use your gun. And that was something that I always had to work with. And being an insider, like a true insider, having been someone who's used a firearm, who's had a firearm used on them, when I brought that perspective to the district attorney's office and worked with police officers and other individuals, the one thing about the district attorney's office, my last point, is that many individuals who go to law school and become prosecutors, they learn about poor people for the first time in a courtroom when they're charged with a crime. So they really develop this thought process about how they're going to view individuals who commit crime. And it's, they don't understand that it's much deeper than the courtroom. And that was the perspective I brought. I tried to make even individuals who pull triggers still are human beings.
Thank you.
My name is Camila Williams. I'm 28 years old. I'm from Chicago. Like my brother here said, I was one who was intrigued with violence. It was something that I felt like I wanted to do to lash out because I was angry. But I'm going to just kind of give you a quick insight of Chicago to explain it right now. It's inhumane. As of January 1st, 2016, 135 people were shot and killed. That's 94 days in a new year. That's unbelievable. 709 people were just shot, bringing shot and killed in 94 days to 841 people. Right here on my shirt, I'm gonna stand up so you can see it, is the faces of gun violence in Chicago that we're not talking about, that nobody seems to care about. This is the reality, and this is what drives me. To be 28 years old, to lose 24 loved ones as of March 27, 2016, but also 6 students to violence is inhumane, and that's what drives me to do something about this issue.
Thank you. Now, the video... Now, while the video made it seem as if the United States is an outlier regarding gun violence, we know that to not be true. You have violence that is happening at extremely high levels in Brazil, Venezuela, and a number of other countries within Africa. So while, for you, Patrick, while the U.S. is not the only outlier, what is unique about the U.S. gun violence in this sense, and why should it be compared to a human rights issue?
I think that, clearly the US is an outlier in a sense, and it's in a region which is itself an outlier. The majority of gun violence globally is in the Americas. Particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, a third of all homicides that are largely carried out by firearms happen in Latin America and the Caribbean. I think that there are different issues at play in other parts of the region. There you have stricter gun laws and gun control, but very weak institutions and inability to implement those laws. You have completely sort of catastrophic breakdown of law and order in certain parts of the big cities in Latin America and the Caribbean, and rampant drug gangs fighting turf wars and with territorial control over different spaces. But I think the United States clearly has the largest arsenal of weapons. It is the largest producer of weapons. It's contributing to the gun violence issue, not just domestically, but across the region in terms of authorized and illicit exports. And it does suffer from the whole gun discourse built around the Second Amendment and the right to self-defense. I think in terms of gun violence as a human rights issue, gun violence has been framed in so many different ways, as a health issue, as a security issue, a criminal issue. For health officials, the gun is to violence as the mosquito is to malaria. And it's a question of eliminating the vector in order to control gun violence. But I think some of those analogies and the analogy to car safety and all those arguments that are brought forth miss the fundamental human dimension, not just of the sort of acute incident of gun violence, but the ramifications and the ripple effect of gun violence that gun violence has for individuals, families and communities. And I think Amnesty can make a very strong case for gun violence being a human rights issue, not just related to the right to life, but a whole constellation of rights that are ruptured and violated when gun violence takes hold of a community, degrades a community and marginalizes the members of that community.
Yeah. That's actually leads right into my next question for Kevin and Camilla. When we think about the issue of gun violence, we recognize that, there's no silver bullet to solve it, no pun intended, but there's also many causes to it. So you're talking about economic issues, you're talking about mental health, you're talking about lack of education, lack of opportunities, lack of jobs in those communities. So for the two of you who live in two of the biggest cities in America, Philadelphia and Chicago, what are the intersections of gun violence that you've seen in your individual work, and how do you think that needs to inform the conversation around solutions?
Okay, so one of the problems that America and Philadelphia and every city has is that gun violence has been framed as a constitutional issue. So when we think about the intersections of gun violence and the gun industry and access to firearms, just like we think about many other things, the national discourse is about the Second Amendment. It isn't really about the human rights perspective. So the intersections that I frequently see as an attorney are completely different than the intersections that I see as someone who cares about people. I served on that mayor's commission for African American males in Philadelphia. And on that commission, one of the issues that we dealt with frequently was mental health issues in that black male community. And the level of trauma and how that informs the decision making of young African American men when, the infamous term that I had, I learned I wanted to be a lawyer when I realized that I was the only person out of my friends of thugs, I was the only one who could talk people out of shooting people. I'd be like, listen, this doesn't make sense, please stop. And they would say things like, I don't care if I go to jail. I don't care if they come and kill me. They were serious. They were 100% serious about the fact that they didn't care. And that's a stage of hopelessness that you have to study as a mental health and a human rights issue. But as an attorney, the intersections are always about the Constitution. Patrick and I were talking about this. I said the United States Constitution is horrible when it comes to human rights. So when you want to talk about the intersections that I see when it comes to economy, mental health, all of the things that I see in my daily work, the best example is an individual who I met. I was doing an expungement clinic. In Philadelphia, expungements are when people get their criminal records erased so that they can go and have better chances at getting a job. And a kid came in, and I had prosecuted him for a gun case. And when he sat down, he stared at me very angrily. And I thought to myself, oh, uh-oh. And he said, can you help me get my record cleaned up? I said, you have a conviction, it's not eligible to be deleted. Here's my business card. Can I help you out? And he said, I'm really looking for a job. I've got 3 kids. I just came home from prison. I heard y'all were doing this. He was actually happy that the prosecutor who had prosecuted him was also in the community doing community work, and I respected him for what he did. So I checked up on him 3 weeks later, and he was in jail for homicide. And that is the intersection. The intersection is that on a Saturday morning, this guy came in looking for an opportunity to come get his life together and get a job. And when I turned him away and said no, his alternatives were to go out and make it on his own. And it's, it's like when you say, do you punish a guy for stealing a loaf of bread from the baker because he wants to feed his family? Well, the sad thing is that they've outsourced all the bakeries, so the only place you can rob nowadays if you want to get a piece of bread is, the person that's selling drugs across the street, and you typically have to do that with a firearm.
From my perspective, just living in Chicago, we're always talking about the jobs, the need for resources, but we got to actually fight to put it in our community because it's just basically conversation. I had a student who's on probation. She's 15, on probation for 5 years. So anything she do, she's going back to juvenile and then possibly to the adult corrections. She was left with no option because she had to steal some Similac for her sister because her mom didn't come home and the baby needs to eat. We do not have the resources in our community that's needed to prevent violent acts that someone like me who lost so many loved ones starting from in high school. I didn't have counselors coming in. I didn't have people to talk to me how to process it. This t-shirts and hoodies and parties, that's how we feel like we got to keep our people connected. We don't know the proper protocol to how to cope with these losses. So I say, let's just not talk about what we need, such as jobs, resources, mental health. Let's actually put it back into these communities that's needed.
Well, then I should ask the question, Camilla, because as somebody who's worked on the national, the state, and the city level, when you see solutions that come out on the national level, do you think it filters down to your community? Do you see it actually taking effect?
Well, none of it filters down, period, because if it did, we wouldn't have this problem. But I think that it needs to filter down. And that's something that I believe that Amnesty can do, is help that those resources filter down to those communities, well, to my community.
Yeah. And Kevin, I mean, I've known you forever, and every time I hear your story, I'm blown away, because reality-wise, you are the exception to the norm. People could have not done what you have done and still been able to quote unquote make it out. And so my question, because I know we disagree on many things, would be what allowed you to kind of navigate those pipelines to leadership, and also what is missing in those communities where young people who may have gotten arrested for a nonviolent crime or may have actually participated in a violent crime, for them to then get access to those pipelines?
I would say exposure. I went to college at a school called Kutztown University, in a remarkably conservative place. It was a culture shock. I went to school at a school that was surrounded by farms. Philadelphia could be like an echo chamber. If I said that I wanted to do something, 90% of the time the people around me were like, that sounds like a really good idea. Including if I said, let's go down the street and rob the bank. People would say, I'm riding. That's how we speak. What I think is that when I went into the more conservative environment, and I had a conversation last night about this, it kind of makes you marshal your points a little bit better. Even if you're in any organization and everyone's like-minded, it leads to you becoming someone who kind of rests on your laurels and you're not sharp. I think going to Kutztown really gave me an opportunity to hear people who did not think like me, who I'll never agree with, but also made me sit and be a little bit more reflective about whether or not my thought process was, I wanted to get from A to Z, but did I actually do my homework the way through? So I learned how to walk a tight line. And I also understood that I had to solve my problem myself. When you talked about the mental health issues and how we cope, many individuals, when they turn to the communities to get help, they're put into programs that probably make them worse off. The mental health issues are treated by individuals who are, if you think about it, if a child has a very bad mental health issue and they are giving a therapeutic support staff worker in school and they lash out violently, it's typically a recent graduate of a college liberal arts program that can't get a job anywhere else, who's getting paid $12 an hour. That shows where our priorities are. And I just happen to be blessed, by God and by individuals who cared about me with the insight to say, you know what, that doesn't make sense, Kevin. You can't keep doing that. And I stayed away from drugs. Which is, we also talked about the coping mechanism with drugs is a huge problem. Both of my parents had issues with crack cocaine. The number of individuals I've prosecuted or represented who have committed shootings where they don't remember what actually happened, where they can actually say, did you do it? And they'd be like, listen, dog, I was so high, I don't know what happened that night. I woke up in prison. That is our community, but that is a result of an increase in people saying, we're going to give them a $12 an hour TSS support worker and put them on enough drugs so that they sit there and they become vegetables, and then it spans out of control. I mean, that's what I saw as the alternative, and I didn't want to do that.
Yeah. Now, Kevin Patrick mentioned, I think many people would probably agree, we're pretty horrible on human rights, not just gun violence, but a number across the board, which we talked about briefly earlier, the fact that gun violence actually impacts a host of other human rights that you don't have access to, whether that's getting access to school, being able to freely move throughout society. But my question to you is, what is the impact of the lax gun laws in the U.S. and how is that impacting individuals across the border? Because while we're talking about domestic policy still impacts other people, and in many cases it elevates violence in other areas. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have a very strange patchwork of regulation and no uniform federal structure, which makes it basically ineffective and gaping loopholes across the board. I think it's important to look at this issue when you're thinking about gun violence, to step away a bit from America, look at the international perspective, and remember that large parts of the world live with negligible levels of gun violence and quite well-regulated firearms laws. You know, in large parts of Europe and Asia, there aren't these serious problems. In Japan, in 2014, there were 6 firearms deaths in total in a population of 130 million. And countries facing similar problems have overcome them through, in part, gun regulation. The classic example that's always cited is Australia, that suffered a horrific mass shooting in the 1990s when a young 28-year-old took a semi-automatic and killed 35 people. And in the wake of that was a kind of the Sandy Hook moment for Australia. There was a raft of very strict legislation, uniform federal licensing, registering firearms, a hugely successful buyback scheme. 1 million firearms were taken out of circulation, a third of the numbers of firearms that were held privately and destroyed. And as a result, gun violence halved. There hasn't been there's been one mass shooting in 20 years in Australia, and that was a relatively small domestic incident when a man killed 4 members of his family. So it is possible, and if we look at this through the kind of human rights lens and look at the responsibilities of states, then states must be trying to take as stringent measures as possible to reduce violence. It may take a long time. The context in America is obviously very different from Australia. There's a whole series of problems, but that does not resolve the responsibility of the state to put forward as strict as measures as possible to begin to reduce violence and control the problem.
Now, many of us might have heard of buyback programs where community organizers, legislators will offer a gift card or some incentive for an individual to turn in their gun without facing prosecution. I see your face, Camilla. And I think many of us would agree that they don't work because, and to Kevin, legislation impacts violence across borders, but it also impacts people across state lines. So while you may take the gun back from that individual at that moment, the ability for him to get access to a gun again is pretty high because of the lax gun laws across state lines. So Kevin, as a former prosecutor, how did you deal with that? Like, what was the impact of recognizing not just across state lines, but in a state like Pennsylvania, you can live in a very urban community like Philadelphia, but you can be in the deep South in a matter of hours in the same state. So how as a prosecutor did you deal with those intersections? And did the lack of legislation help or hurt your work in the courtroom?
It was remarkably hard to prosecute gun violence and respect people's rights in Philadelphia. We implemented a program that reduced Philadelphia had its lowest number of homicides in 2013 in 60 years. So it went down to levels that were lower than they were in the 50s. That's how low Philadelphia's homicide rate went. The primary reason was that there was a task force implemented in Philadelphia called focused deterrence. It was a fancy word for shock and awe. If there was an implied promise, no one ever said it, but we pretty much brought in all the drug dealers and said, if you shoot, we will come get you. We don't care if you were the shooter or the person who got shot. If you shoot, we will come find you and we will make your life a living hell. And they listened. And then we made a couple examples. Individuals, one gang that I was the chief prosecutor assigned to, they shot at somebody and we sent all 25 of them to jail, one by one. I sent my police officers out there. We authorized wiretaps. We searched their homes, all constitutional, but very bad when it comes, I mean, the Constitution says that you can't lock somebody up, but then we pass a law saying if you ride your street down the bike the wrong way, you can be stopped. So, I mean, you wait till the guy rides the bike up the street the wrong way and then you stop him. You know, that was the sort of thing that we did to reduce violence. The lack of gun laws in the United States when it comes to inter-border transportation of firearms, I worked with a federal team of law enforcement officials who were trying to track firearms that were being traded throughout, like the gun trade in our city. And when I say that the laws are so lax that you can go online and purchase 40 firearms on Facebook, you can buy guns on Facebook, and
you can rent a gun for an hour if you need to.
I mean, it is abysmal. And the manner in which we had to deal with this was almost, we could not stop it. The only way that we could stop an individual from getting their hands on a firearm was to lock them up for selling drugs.
So I saw your reaction, Camilla, when I asked about the buyback programs. Tell us, what programs in your community have you seen work and what don't? Because I think there's a lot of misconception on those programs, similar and non-similar programs to it. Like, do you think they have an impact in communities like Chicago long term?
The gun buyback program, just to give my thoughts on it, just from experience and from what I hear off, you know, the block. Of course, they want to get rid of the guns that are hot. So of course they'll go take them in, so right or wrong, because the guns are hot. And, you know.
And when you say hot, what do you mean?
I'm sorry. They have been used in some sort of crime, whether it's a homicide, robbery, something. They get rid of them. And that's what a lot of former friends that I know, that's what they did. But they take the money because in Chicago, the straw purchasing is so bad, you don't even have to go to a gun dealer to get the guns. You can just go to someone who actually bought the guns and get them from actually cheaper. I used to buy my guns for $25, maybe less than that. AK-47, maybe $75 to $150. So, I mean, you get, what, $50 or maybe $100 just from trading in a gun. Programs that I will actually see that works is, I want to say, more like community programs, like basketball tournaments or something like that, or activity centers where you're exposing young people to different things. I have young people who wants to learn how to cook, but in my neighborhood, they don't have culinary programs that you can come to on a Saturday. People want to learn how to swim, so just basically community-based programs that will teach something different languages. Those are programs that work.
Here's some clapping. So to all of you, I mean, as an advocate, as a former prosecutor turned attorney, you're a private attorney now, right? You're making like the real money, right? Yeah. You can be honest with us. So a prosecutor turned attorney and a researcher. When we think about the issue around gun violence, a lot of times they're broken in silos. You have the advocates that are just focused on the mental health. You have the advocates just focusing on abusers getting access to guns. You have the advocates focusing on urban, suburban violence, school shootings, guns on campus. How do we break down these silos if we're really going to have a serious conversation about pushing the needle forward and preventing guns from getting in the hands of individuals who are going to do harm? How do we break down those silos and have serious conversations about solutions? And we can, you want to start?
Basically, we got to talk to people that's actually living it. You know, you want to talk to people like myself, which is, it's been 10 years away from what I, used to do. We need to talk to the people that's still in that environment. And then we have to come together with a plan, because there's so much division. And some people just want to say, oh no, we just want to be comfortable with this set of people and that set of people, and we won't come together with one realistic solution, because everything that you just mentioned affects the community as a whole. Mm-hmm. So I think that we got to start with A, want to listen, 2, come together. And then also, we all know someone who's very influential and can make a decision. We need to put the pressure on the people that can help the people in my communities like Chicago. That's it.
It's really discouraging knowing that this is such a place of complacency in America when it's such a big problem. You would think people were like making money off of it or something. That was a joke.
They are.
They're making lots of money. But what's going to happen is that they're going to have to be strange bedfellows. And we see that right now with the drug and incarceration reform debate, the drug abuse and incarceration reform debate. I'm pretty sure Amnesty International has been telling people that the United States has a mass incarceration problem for a very long time. But now all of a sudden, uber conservative Republicans are like, United States has a mass incarceration problem. And you guys are sitting there like, you think? You see with the heroin epidemic, that is the scourge of white America now. Now, all of a sudden, people have compassion for people who abuse drugs. And you have people sitting in rooms agreeing about a problem that have never agreed on anything. They literally said, what's Amnesty International for? And they say, they're for this. And then those people say, well, we're going to be against it. That's their theory of life until it starts to invade their homes. So I think that the problem is going to begin to shift when we start to see gun violence as a middle-class white American problem, and then all of a sudden they will start coming to the table and say, you guys are experts on this, right? So you'd be really surprised. The number one, I have friends on Facebook who are police through and through. I mean, when a police officer shoots an unarmed black man, that police officer was 100% right in their mind. And they think that we need to change our gun laws in this country 100 times over. Because you'd be surprised that individuals who are in the Philadelphia Police Department feel that our police officers are terrified because of our gun laws. And these are individuals that most of the time when I'm doing work in the African American community, I'm screaming at them incessantly. But then at the same time, they hold almost the same exact views on the gun violence problem that I do. Because when I was a prosecutor, I sat with the officer who picked up a baby that had been shot in the head and rushed her to Children's Hospital. I had chastised that officer because he was on my investigations team and they were complaining about him being too aggressive. So I said, brother, you have to calm down. Black guy. He was thinking of stopping the guy who shot the baby 15 minutes before he did the shooting, but he said, Kev, I had been listening to everybody tell me that I was being too aggressive. So I just asked him, hey, what are you doing around here? And the guy said, mind your business. And I went to spin the block to see what was going on, and they started shooting. He quit being a street officer and joined what we call the Police Athletic League. He now runs a children's center in South Philadelphia in the same community where he saved that the baby died, but he tried to save her. That mental health issue for that African-American male police officer is the same mental health issue that I have had when I had to bury and be a pallbearer for a friend. We look at it from a perspective of them versus us, when all of us are looking at the same issue and just coming away with the same traumas, but then directing it against each other. So the same way that we see this shift when it comes to drug reform and mass incarceration, gun violence will trail. It's just probably going to take a very long time.
So before I go to Patrick, then I should ask the question in relation to police, can we arrest our way out of gun violence?
No. The criminal justice system is chemotherapy for gun violence. Okay? What does chemotherapy do? It kills the body, and you pray that your body lasts longer than the cancer does. The criminal justice system is chemotherapy for gun violence. You arrest, and the police and everyone involved just say, please fix this problem before we end up with the issues we have now. Mass incarceration, which pretty much is decimating the American economy.
So Patrick, how do we break down the silos?
Well, I mean, I think, what has already been said is very, very clear. It needs holistic solutions. There are a lot of cross-cutting themes, but lots of different types of gun violence that might need different solutions, such as intimate partner violence, suicide, accidental death, so forth. But in terms of communities and communities that are ravaged by gun violence, the only thing I would add is that we need to look at international experience. I mean, all the things that you've described to me resonate powerfully with my experiences in Latin America, in Brazil, in the big Brazilian cities. You have very similar situations of communities that have been completely marginalized, that have lack of public services that have a very violent state intervention and incarceration policy that is basically just locking up petty drug dealers as a means to solve the situation, and almost no resources going into root causes, public health, public safety, and issues that can turn around a situation. In terms of getting surplus guns out of the community, that needs to be part of a total solution that has many different elements that could only work when the community itself has an alternative path, that it can see a future, that it has hope to get out of the situation of a sort of cycle of violence and deprivation. So I think we need to break down silos, not just within the United States, but across the region, learn from similar experiences of urban violence elsewhere, and then we can look holistically and at the sort of cross-cutting themes that really underlines gun violence as an issue globally.
Thank you. Oh, I'm happy you mentioned solutions. They're my favorite topic. So what are the solutions? What are some of the things that you've seen that have worked either on the international level, as a prosecutor, as an advocate? What are the solutions that we need to be thinking about as we develop campaigns, as we develop policy papers, reports? Like, how do we make sure that that we're informed in making and having solutions that are reflective of the people who are directly impacted, but also the ones that are doing the research?
I think I mentioned it once before, is we need realistic programs in our community, outlets that people can go to. I don't know how many people is familiar with what's going on in Chicago right now. Well, just our state, Illinois. We don't have a budget, so schools are closing. We don't have mental health facilities.
And I just read an article that in the last 3 months, gun violence in Chicago has risen 75% just in the first 3 months of 2015.
Yes.
2016.
Yes.
Crazy.
So, I mean, when resources like that is taken, you just have mayhem in the city and in the state. So once we deal with that and we start putting back these programs, like people that have IEPs and 504 plan students, they don't even have advocates anymore. Students can't even see the nurse social workers. So we need programs like that. So those are solutions, is basically fighting for the programs and also exposing culture. The young people, maybe in Philadelphia, I don't know what it's called there, but the young people in Chicago glorify the life of being savages.
Well, that's what we call it.
Okay, all right. So they glorify the life of being savages because they think that that's what they're supposed to do. They don't know that you can go to school, such as myself and such as people on this panel, that you can do something different with your life. They think that their life's supposed to be a life of just violence, just corruption, just fighting, just being outrageous.
So let me ask you then, before we move to Kevin and Patrick, because I mean, growing up in Philly, a lot of times you don't leave your 4-block radius. Your zip code is your entire world. Yeah. The only trip you ever take out of your community is more than likely to the zoo in middle school, the zoo in high school, and your prom may be out of your community. But so the question I have for you is like, when you are a young person and you're constantly surrounded by violence, by drugs, by lack of hope, how do you give them hope for the young people you work with, knowing that they're constantly seeing this happen in their communities?
To be honest, I don't even know how I basically did it. Like just coming from just getting my GED, starting from math 80, which is like lower in college, to basically right now getting my master's degree. I just decided that basically, thank you, that I wanted something different for myself, and that's why I know that I have to still be placed in my community so that they can know that you can decide to say, hey, just walk in there like I did. Mm-hmm. The gang life not for me anymore. I've seen too many people get shot and killed. I have a son now. I walked into a community college and just started asking questions. And from a community college, I started, like Kevin here, being exposed to other things, like other programs. And even though I felt like, do I really fit? I think I talk a little different, but I still just been a part of what it was because I desired that change. And in my community, I talk to young people all the time. They desire that change, but when you living on an empty stomach and you don't have any resources or your lights is cut off, it's very difficult. But I'm a person that let them see that there is light under the tunnel, and I don't mind taking kids to do different things. I don't mind actually out of my own pocket that I don't get funded for doing a skate jam and just inviting thousands of young people out because I want them to see something different.
Thank you.
There are short-term solutions and there are long-term solutions because, again, this problem is both practical and it occurs in the abstract. So let me get to what I mean. In Philadelphia, we're looking to start community schools. Community schools are pretty much with the lack of, it used to be that there were always community centers, and I don't mean literal community centers. I mean that in the history of America, there was a church, and then people moved into that community because they worshiped at the church. And the business of the church was to make sure that everything in that community maintained its sanity, that the pastor visited homes when someone passed away. The financial community in the church, they made sure people didn't go hungry. Charity went through the church. The corporation has now become the focus of American cities rather than our institutions that were more charitable. So what's happened now is that we take away the reciprocal nature of the community center, and now we give corporate tax breaks to keep Comcast in Philadelphia. So with the community schools model that we're probably going to bring to Philadelphia, we also said that we wanted to do the same thing with trauma centers for African American children. The incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder in Philadelphia and imagine in Chicago is probably higher than it is with individuals who are returning from wars. And if you think about it, people who get high and then go do things that put them in jail for the rest of their lives, they're just cowards. It's a cowardly form of suicide. I mean, if you don't have any hope and you go out and take it out on other people, it's a more cowardly form of suicide. That's how I always have looked at the gun violence problem. So the community schools model and bringing that trauma-informed community reciprocal nature of making sure that there's a place where everybody knows everything that's going on instead of having to go see your social worker downtown and your doctor in Northeast Philly and different places. By bringing all those resources into one place, that's really important. The long term is that, number one, we have to get Supreme Court justices who are going to look at the gun rights issue, the gun crime and shootings issue as a human rights issue and not in the scheme of the Second Amendment. Because I'm going to tell you right now, we were laughing. If you really believe that the government is not going to come and kill you because you own a firearm, if you think that Waco, Texas will ever occur again when they have drones, if you think that you're going to stop government from taking your firearms when they have nuclear bombs and the ability to literally send in machines to kill you without you actually confronting another human being, you're just silly. But still, people think that the Second Amendment protects their right to have a firearm to stop government from coming in and overbearing upon them. Obama will have your head on a stick if he wanted it, okay? So no, the Second Amendment isn't about protecting your right to own a firearm. That entire conversation is just outdated. Technology is going to take us to an entirely different place when it comes to firearms and the manner in which that we commit crimes and things like that. So you need Supreme Court justices, you need senators, you need legislators at every level of government that are they're just not with it. They're just over it. Like, come on, stop this silly debate that's elementary style. It's elementary school that the manner in which they talk about gun rights in this country. Like, are you serious? Do you really think that your little AK-47 is going to stop the FBI from coming in and taking you out?
Patrick.
I think, there has to be some kind of reality injected back into
I'm sorry, can you imagine if it's Donald Trump coming to get you? If Donald Trump wants your weapon, he'll come and get it.
Thanks, Kevin.
Scary, I'm sorry.
No, it definitely. No, but I think that while I think perhaps we've got some consensus that there are deep underlying social issues that are basically the core problems here, we can't lose sight at the same time of the sort of bread and butter gun control issues that have gone round and round and round and gone nowhere in the States. It's a huge problem in America because of the easy accessibility and the sheer quantity of small arms. But without addressing that problem, you have a situation where you have social deprivation that's turbocharged by gun violence, and a sort of downward spiral in communities that just become more violent, and the reaction has been kind of repressive policing that has only exacerbated the problems in those communities. So I think, we've got to look at the States as a peculiar example of one of the few countries that does not have a universal system which licenses the gun owner and registers the gun and carries out proper checks on access to firearms. Without those sort of basic bread and butter issues, then there's going to be this interaction between the socio-economic situation and violence created by this very easy accessibility to firearms.
Thank you. So I have one more question, but I am going to hold it until the end. But I know there is a number of questions in the audience, and so there's 2 mics in the front. So if you have questions, and just to remind people, questions normally end with a question mark. But if you have quick statements, you can make those too. Okay, we can start over here. And if you can say your name and where you're from, that would be great.
My name is Salima. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I go to Glendale Community College. I'm glad that you brought up the public defender part, because that's the part that I feel that we are impacted by the most. When I was arrested and I had to go through that process, my mom was crying. Nobody was explaining anything to me. I had no idea what was going on. I'm lucky that I got out of there, right? So when I decided to rebuild my life, that was one of the things that I thought about. When we deal with lack of education, intimidation practices, things of that nature, in the mass incarceration, all of that, I think it starts with not understanding what's happening in that process. Do you think that there would ever be any kind of reform in the public defender arena to work with the community so that we feel better about who's policing us and how that process goes?
Thank you.
If you could write down, there's a woman by the name of Keir Bradford Gray. She's an African-American woman. She was the first ever, her name is spelled K-E-I-R. Her name is hyphenated. Bradford is B-R-A-D-F-O-R-D. and the last thing is Gray. Keir was the first African-American woman to be appointed to this we have a county called Montgomery County in Pennsylvania that's very affluent, and she was the chief public defender there. She had something called community defenders. She forces her defenders to go out into the community, and it used to be that the public defender's office, and she just got appointed to become the chief defender in Philadelphia. What happened is that public defender's offices in America started to look like privilege. They were individuals who could afford to work in a job that didn't pay. So you end up with a bunch of Ivy League privileged kids who are like, fight the power, but they also don't have much knowledge. The district attorney's office in Philadelphia is about probably 40% diverse. The public defender's office is like 5% diverse. But that goes to show you that what happens is, and it's an issue because it's charity work rather than impassioned work. So Keir Bradford Gray, if you look her up, she talks specifically, and she's been traveling the country introducing this community-based model of public defendering.
Thank you. Can we take the next question over here?
Hey there, I live in the city of St. Louis. I've got a question, I guess out of frustration. Trying to get a white legislature in Jefferson City to vote any sort of gun restrictions is like whistling in the wind. So yet I'm trying to work within my community. I live right in the city, and I help take a spiritual program into the city jail, and almost 99% of the people that attend our meetings are people of color, and they're there either for drug possession or gun possession, or the crimes they committed with those. And it seems like the frustration I have is the peer pressure. I feel like I'm whistling in the wind at times. The kids, I know what I was like as a kid. Anything an adult said to me, even out of their own experience, was lost. What can we do in the community? I mean, the bigger we'll be fighting, I'm afraid we'll be fighting the Second Amendment freaks for the rest of our lives. So what can we do in our community? This whole thing of this intersection of drugs and guns. Even if you legalize drugs, the price isn't going to go down, and the crime that relates to it is still going to be going on. I guess here's the question: what can someone like me in the community? I live in St. Louis, and probably 80%, I think this year so far, 80% of the people that have been murdered are people of color.
And if I can just expand on that question for all of you, because I think we have a range of individuals in the audience, advocates, members, some are directly impacted individuals, some are allies in this work. So to expand on that question, what can our audience do to get engaged, but also to bring legislation like that to the forefront?
I'll answer the question first. To anybody that's in the community, you have to continue to be, first, don't give up hope. You have to stay in the community, because the people that's struggling with the issues, they really appreciate it. But you also have to kind of help them change the mindset. Like you mentioned, the legislative, right? So, and do you go to the legislative by yourself? Do the people in the community go with you?
We do.
Okay, so the people, you have to encourage them to want to be a part of their process, because I don't know if you guys paid attention to what happened in Chicago this past March 15th when we got Anita Alvarez out of office. That came from us being in the community, regardless of what people were saying, oh, she's not gonna leave, she's too powerful, she's backed by the machine, it's money. Everywhere Anita went, we went. We didn't care if she went to church or the grocery store. We was bye. We was interrupting her with her business friends, calling her out. So, and once people were seeing that, they were like, yeah, she wrongly charged me too. They started getting involved, and they started forming this movement. So basically, you have to stay in the community and continue to engage the people. And once you engage the people, then you will start to see change.
Thank you. Can we take the next one over here and then we'll move over here?
I thank you so much for this panel. You know, this is criminal justice reform in general, in a broad sense, is what I've been involved in. That includes mass incarceration. It's really tough. I live in upstate New York, and a lot of people from downstate get sent upstate. And so just looking at it from the point of view of what can we do to get fewer people with jail sentences, or I mean prison sentences. In some of the counties upstate, the prison is the biggest employer. So, you know, it's really hard because when you start to talk, well, you know, we should really be investing money in a different way, there's a lot of resistance when, you know, in some communities, a lot of family members are actually working there. So if you can give me some insight in terms of how to tackle that, or how to make people understand whose livelihood depends on, you know, incarceration and so on, to get them to understand that we really should tackle it differently. I would also like to make a comment that came up earlier in terms of the intersection of drugs and gun violence, and I totally agree that with the use of heroin and it affecting, you know, more of the white community, that we're going to see a paradigm shift in terms of suddenly, you know, drug use, you can understand it as a mental health issue, or, you know, you can understand addicts as, you know, addiction as a health problem rather than a criminal issue. Where I would differ is when it comes to the use of guns, if white people use heroin, they still don't have to use a gun to get the heroin. And so I don't think it's necessarily going to change the conversation about gun violence.
2 points. The first one regarding, just that you just finished with that, with heroin and guns, there's a section of Philadelphia that's being ravaged. Once the drug issue hits rock bottom and you see the resources disappear from a community, then you see the violence introduced. So right now, they don't have to use the guns, but you look at individuals that were rich who got addicted to OxyContin, and the next thing you know, they're, you know, emptying out their 401k, and then the next thing you know, they're robbing banks. You know, when that becomes a mass scale problem and people are turning around and committing crime as a result of the heroin, it's a 10 to 20 year process. It's not something that you'll see introduced yet, but it's starting to rear its ugly head. Regarding the mass incarceration problem of the prison industrial complex, we're going to have to look to developing countries, because one of the things that I've always kind of talked about with the war on drugs and the prison industrial complex is that America treats its poor communities the same way it treats developing countries that it sees somewhere to make a profit. They introduce guns into the community, let things into a country the way they did in Iran-Contra and things like that. They introduce guns into a community en masse, let people ravage each other, and then go in and steal the resources. That's kind of like how America does things. And it happens the same way in our communities. Pennsylvania has no prisons in Philadelphia. They have plenty of temporary lockup jails, but every person who's convicted of a crime in Philadelphia is sent upstate. And most of these state prisons are built places that are strategic. Philadelphia legislators say, will you give us more money for education? They say, will you let me build a prison in my county? That is how we barter. And what we're going to have to do is, my response specifically is that we're going to invest in education, because we have to get unskilled laborers a place to work that is not a prison. Prisons provide easy individuals. I mean, you don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to have any skills. You can just get a job. If you're a former football player that didn't go to college, you go be a corrections officer. And if we can get individuals educated on in new industries, such as probably things that we're going to have to make strange bedfellows on. Environmental, I mean, the fracking industry in Pennsylvania is creating millions and hundreds of jobs, but nobody likes fracking. But people have to work somewhere. We have so many industrial towns in Pennsylvania that are just dead. There are no jobs there. And the thing that saves those communities is a prison. So we have to really look at our education problem that we have in this country when we're talking about the prison industrial complex, because the truth of the matter is that we close prisons. We've reduced our prison population in Philadelphia to the lowest levels it's been in about 10 years. And the corrections officers union is like, what are you doing? They're trying to build a new prison now. And we're like, no.
Patrick?
I just wanted to make one small point on this intersection between drugs and guns. And I think what we need to do is resist thinking that that is an inevitable outcome. I mean, there are many other cities around the world, cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh, for instance, that have epidemic levels of drug use and devastate communities, create petty crime and theft and so forth, but do not have the accompanying gun violence. Just because the environment is different, it's more regulated, it's very difficult to get hold of guns. So, I think that it might be a counsel of despair in some ways to just associate it, just to say that inevitably where there is social deprivation, there will be gun violence. And, we need to find ways of reversing and unpicking that relationship.
So I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I want to get in all the questions. So if everyone who is currently standing can be quick and concise with their question, and the panelists will try to answer as many as they can. Can we start with you?
Mine's a little bit quick because I kind of can relate to the city of Philly and Chicago. I grew up in New Orleans, and we have some of the same gun violence, drugs. I watched heroin eat my dad alive and make him resort to violence. So my question is, what can we do about educational systems like New Orleans, where the teachers just sit back, don't really care, come in to collect their check, or we have students in the class with ankle braces around their, around their ankle, and just come to class because the correctional facilities say, if you don't go here, you're going to go to jail, or give them an alternative to want them to get educated, or, expose programs to them to where they actually just have hope. Because down there, in places such as this, we just don't have hope, so they result to killing each other. There's, and then of course our government is corrupt, there's no funding at all.
Thank you. Questions over here?
They kind of answered some of what I wanted to say. I was born and raised in Patterson. I'm currently living in Newark in New Jersey, where we just first established the first CCRB of its kind in this country. It's different from the other ones. But what I'm saying is, the stats that I've been aware of from coming to all these activist conventions are they're building 5 prisons and jails to every 1 university they're building. If she's saying lack of resources, why are they building so many jails? Why are they not building what our youth are asking for, the culinary schools, the things that our youth from early on really want to do, like she said? Why do they keep building these jails? What I see it as is the prison industrial complex is supposed to be modern day slavery. I'm seeing it as their way of just keeping our people of color still enslaved, working for $1.60 a day. That's why they keep building these prisons and just populating them with our people of color. My youngest son's father has been in prison 5 times for guns and drugs and everything else. And when I go see him, I get the brunt of it because they just look at my skin color and they look at him and they think I'm white with someone that's black, not realizing I'm first generation born here. I see this country for what it is. My parents are from South America. In the summertime, I get discriminated just as much when my color comes in. So I work with a sex worker org. I've dealt with police over the years. I've been robbed at gunpoint. I've been charged with assaulting a police officer with a gun that never existed, and then it was just dropped at prosecutorial discretion at a municipal level. So they're just looking for ways to keep our communities down. Why aren't we addressing these real issues? Stop building these prisons and give our children what they really need to keep them out. Like she said, why is that not what's happening? The mass shootings I've seen are predominantly done by white people in these white schools. The shootings in our communities of color, yeah, but they're not as bad as what's really making the media. The mass shootings. So our guns are already in white America. So why are the laws so lax?
Thank you. The next.
My name is Gaurav Bhatia, and I live here in Florida. And kind of to touch up on the additional aspect of gun violence against minorities, like with Hispanics, blacks. I think another thing I want to point out is there's also a lot of violence against Native Americans, and I think that's something that's not really touched up on a lot. What do you think is, I guess, the future of addressing gun violence in Native American tribes?
Thank you. Final question?
So I'm perhaps kind of playing the devil's advocate here a little bit. I understand, people are categorically opposed to owning guns, to using a gun in any context, and then you have others that use it for self-protection. How do you strike a balance, especially in communities of color? Maybe this is, a question for Camila or any of you. How do you strike a balance in communities of color, those that are defending themselves with a firearm, and teaching children, anyone in your community, not to use guns, for destructive purposes, especially when it comes to interactions with police?
So I heard a few themes: self-defense, making sure that Native Americans are included in the conversation around gun violence, making sure that we consider the intersections of the criminal justice system in relation to gun violence, and then as well as how do we prioritize education as a preventative measure in preventing gun violence versus continuing to build more prisons. So that's where you all come in.
One more, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I was afraid. Well, I work with immigrants in detention centers, and it's the business. It is not because they wanna build jails. It's because it's the business. It's the business for the government, and it's the business of private companies. For each individual, an immigrant that is there, asylum seekers, it is $160 a day, and it's a quota. More than 34,000 people have to be detained every day. Is as you said, like, how are we going to stop the jails? They're building the jails in poor communities, white, the black, and very, very far away towns. It's the only job available, and it's a private company that owns that jail. That private company, they already give money to the politician. With lobbies, they invested in their campaigns. It is just a whole system that's corrupt, from the top to the bottom.
Thank you.
How are we going to stop that? If we cannot do it alone in the prisons, that jail immigrants, because that's happening everywhere. Not only with immigrants, but African Americans, Latinos, everywhere.
Okay, we'll add one more. That's it. Love you all.
Love you too. Love everyone here. Okay. Thank you for Amnesty International again for having a conference here in South Florida. We appreciate it, because most of the stuff you all are talking about are so serious and so important. As much as Chicago, as much as Philadelphia are having their own issues, Miami itself is also having their own issues with gun violence, with kids themselves, 14-year-olds are killing each other for no reason. I appreciate all the intellects, especially this conference. Most of the conferences I've been in, and it's okay to go out and digest and understand the system. But this system has been here for 200 years. This system has kept perpetuating itself with violence, and we are using our intellects to break down a system that is not only accepted to us, but cannot provide to us the needs we need for our world that we're looking for. So I feel like we need to direct our resources. IBM put out a commercial. They turned all the lights off, and then everybody was on the floor sleeping, trying to think and put a creative idea together. When you have awesome people in this room, people who wants to see a new generation, a new society of people, of worlds, we can't try to cleanse ourselves with the same instrument that dirtied us. We have to somehow come together, pull ourselves collectively together, so we can do what we call is an alternative to what this system is. We need to create that alternative. What does that alternative look like? We can't talk about gun violence without economics. Thank you. Yeah. We can't. We can't sit here and have an entire panel of intellectuals not talking about money.
Yeah.
We need to talk about money. We need to talk about money. Money is the first option. Social issues is the second option, because those two need to come together. There's no way you're going to go into a black and brown community and pull out your master's degree. And like his sister said, you need to be grounded. Your ears need to be on the streets. Whether you're black or white, the issues that we're facing is a non-human one. Like, we need to put our humanity together and go in the streets. You know what I mean? We need to go ahead, and the mothers who are losing the child, they need to stand up together and say, we're going to patrol the streets tonight. You know, so those are the type of things. We need that commitment to go far beyond our intellects and the degrees we have.
So expanding the conversation to include all of those perspectives.
Exactly. This is not a black and white issue. This is a human issue.
Yes. Thank you.
I want to answer. This is the question right here from New Orleans. I would say you have to start doing our own mentoring, the young people within your community, because once they have mentors and people that have been through the struggle, they will know it's a way out, and then they will want to do better. So I'm gonna say you just have to mentor.
Really quickly, because we're out of time. The recurring theme that was in the questions is why? Why are these things happening? Why the education problems? Why the money problems? Why all the issues? And I'm going to ask you a question. Why not? What incentive does a government official have to care? Barack Obama lost one election to Bobby Rush. And for everyone that loves Barack Obama, he couldn't even beat Bobby Rush, who represents the most poor part of Chicago, one of the most violent places in America, and he beat Barack Obama. What incentive do we give elected officials to change America? None. We got 20% voter turnout. And then my last point was the young woman who asked, I have a license to carry a firearm, and I will use it. Okay, so there's a book that talks about the civil rights issue involved in the Second Amendment. It's called That Nonviolent Shit Will Get You Killed. It's a history of the fact that while Martin Luther King was out with his hands up talking nonviolence, all his bodyguards had pistols. And what it pretty much says is that the book is great. It starts off by talking about the fact that the Second Amendment was incorporated to stop slave revolts. The militias that rolled around and went to make sure that they controlled people, the only people that they were afraid of were poor white workers and slaves. That's the militias that's what they were controlling. So the Second Amendment was racist in its creation. So how do you balance that? Once you introduce a gun into a community, you got to introduce another one. So it's just a reality. Until we talk about the solutions that Patrick talked about, where we pass gun laws that make laws more strict, there's going to be the wild, wild west, which means that you have to have a sensibility. This is a shift that occurs gradually. When he said, you can have my gun when you can pry it from my cold, dead hands, he was serious, and people will prove him right. Most people will just shoot him.
Patrick, do you have final remarks? Okay, so I'll take moderator privilege and say thank you all for attending this convening, and I'm sure there are additional questions that you all have. And we can have this conversation for hours on end. The issue of gun violence is constantly growing, and it's constantly expanding, and it's going to take all of us to do our job, our due diligence, and actually help to move this issue forward. We're going to have conversations over the next few months to build out a gun violence campaign, and we're going to look to all of you to help to influence it, but also to help to do the work on the ground. So I appreciate you attending this not just the conference, but attending this panel. And if you can join me in giving a round of applause to all of the panelists. Thank you all. I think we're good.
Let's welcome back to the stage Rachel O'Leary, Amnesty International USA's Deputy Executive Director for Membership and Activism.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for staying with us through the end. That was an amazing plenary. And I want to welcome to the stage Margaret Huang to bring us all to a close. Margaret.
Thank you for the music, yay. Great, thanks so much. It's been an amazing weekend, and I know many of you will feel as I do that there was a lot of hard work, particularly behind the scenes, to make this weekend possible. So before I say anything else, I'd like to extend the really genuine appreciation that we have for the hotel staff who kept this weekend working, who made this weekend go smoothly. Thank you. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. Please stand and thank them. Thank you. It's hard work keeping up with all of us, and we're grateful. So thank you very much for a great weekend. Thank you. We had an extraordinary time. First, I want to offer Anne's apologies. She was intended, Ann Burroughs had intended to be here to close us out today. Unfortunately, as many of you will know, Anne has a really bad back, and it's giving her a tremendous amount of pain today, so I suggested that I would come up. But she did ask me to pass along both her gratitude and her goodbyes, as she could not be here this afternoon. Anne wanted me also to talk about all the things we learned this weekend. We learned about building an inclusive human rights movement. We learned about the struggle of being Muslim in America and how we can build solidarity and defend human rights for all. We learned about prison profiteering in the United States. We heard from human rights defenders across the Americas. And we developed our responses here at AIUSA to the global refugee crisis. We had an incredible conversation about our new strategic plan yesterday, and the staff is very excited to get going on the operational plans that will come next. We had a robust membership town hall last night, some great stuff at Slamnesty, and we learned a lot about our new campaigns, the campaign on refugee rights, the campaign on combating gun violence, and we learned about our Art for Amnesty program at the extraordinary plenary yesterday. We also heard stories about what we have done collectively together to change our world. We helped convince the government of Burkina Faso to commit to ending child marriage. We helped to free prisoners of conscience, including Philip Karma from Indonesia and Leila and Arif Yunus from Azerbaijan. We helped to free Shakir Amr from Guantanamo. We helped to free Moses Akatuba from death row in Nigeria. And of course, we helped to free Albert Woodfox after 40 years of solitary confinement. That's you. That's all of us who helped to do that incredible work. But it's not just staff and it's not just members who do this important work. There's another group of people that we're very grateful to have supporting this work, and those are our fellows. I have a quick video to share.
Congratulations, it's a really well-deserved award. You've been an inspiration and will continue to be an inspiration to all of us in the field of human rights, and I don't really appreciate it. Have a great evening, God bless, bye.
You can clap. Fellows at Amnesty work full-time to support our programmatic work in a learning role. Our fellowships help us develop the next generation of Amnesty leaders. Our newest fellowship, being launched today, this year, is the 2016 AIUSA Styron Harvard Fellowship. named on behalf of Rose Styron, a long friend of Amnesty's. I'm so pleased that we've established this inaugural fellowship in Rose's name. Rose is a poet, a journalist, a human rights activist, and she was, in 1970, a founding member of AIUSA. She still serves on our advisory board, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming her to the stage.
I can't thank you all enough. I'm the oldest living Amnesty member here, and I was on the board 40 years ago. I headed the National Advisory Council 30 years ago. I was sort of chief of the 50th anniversary celebration a few years ago, and I had no idea till I came today how little I knew about the wonderful progress and amazing new programs and candidates of Amnesty 2016. And I can't thank you all enough for supporting this surprise fellowship for me, Harvard Amnesty. And I had the great pleasure of helping choose the first Styron Harvard Amnesty Fellow, a wonderful young woman who you will meet right now, Roya Gurnigan.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Ria, and I'm from Istanbul, Turkey, and I'm a sophomore at Harvard College. I can't express how honored I am to be speaking in front of a wonderful crowd of people who take injustice personally, who keeps hope alive, and who amplify voices. Voices much like that of my 15-year-old self. My dad was a naval officer at the time when one night he was summoned by the Turkish government courts for interrogation for allegedly organizing a coup plan. So naturally he said, "There's nothing to worry about. I'll go testify, I'm innocent, and come back home." Unfortunately, he did not come back home for the following 3 years, where he was kept in prison without a proper trial. It was a mass incarceration of over 300 military officers based on forged evidence and false charges due to purely political reasons. So we, as the family and friends of these prisoners of conscience, organized this weekly protest under the name The Silent Scream. It was rightly named because our silence was only heard by those who dared to listen. And unfortunately, not many did. So as I watched friends fall silent when I brought up the topic on dinner tables and friend gatherings, I could only think to myself, wow, it must be really hard to be them. Because my fight was against the corruption and the injustice, but their fight was against themselves. When every day they had to look in the mirror and make the tough choice between what is right and what is easy. So once again, I'm proud to be standing among those who never choose the easy way out, who break this culture of silence masked under terms such as politically correctness. So thank you for making my voice heard. And thank you, Rose, for your belief in me and for giving me this incredible honor of being the inaugural fellow of the Styron Fellowship. I look forward to my work in New York this summer and to find out more about Amnesty's Individuals at Risk program. Thank you once again.
And here is a very small token of appreciation to Rana. Ruya.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. Rose, do you want to come this way? It'll be a little easier.
I'm happy to note that the Styron Fellowship joins our Lattice Christoph Fellowship and the Young Leaders Fellowship which is generously endowed by Alan Davis to increase diversity and inclusion within the organization by engaging youth at the forefront of our movement. We at Amnesty want to say thank you to Rose, to Alan Davis, and the Christoph family for their generosity in supporting our programmatic work. A lot of other people in this room helped to make this weekend possible. I'm going to thank people, and I hope that they will stand and be recognized. Our community partners who helped us with all of our substantive sessions this weekend, members of our board, international guests from other sections and the International Secretariat, the executive team, and no one is standing, and I see you all in the audience. I know I'm not going to talk that long. You will not have to stand up for too long. So please, Terry Rockefeller and Alex and Bob, and thank you, Ramesh. Thank you. Please stand. The executive team, our staff and interns, the AGM program committee, the volunteers who gave us their time this weekend, and there are a few people that I need to come up to the front of the room. Mr. Johnny Gonzalez. And Suhail Santana. This amazing duo head up our incredible events team and really put in the incredible amount of work for this weekend. Ebony Brickhouse and Taliba Abuya. These guys are the organizers for the South, and if Carol Pearson were here, she would get up on stage and push me aside and tell me how amazing these field organizers are because they do all the hard work. There are 6 interns who have worked like full-time staff on our events. And they have to come up too. Brian Recker, Alina Jacobs, Julia Pittorino, Omaima Khan, Marie Alex Morel, and Kamala Orlovo. And now I need everyone in the room to stand up. Yes. This is my challenge to you. We have started this weekend to change our world again. I need each of you to take this home, each of you to lift up the challenges that we learned about this weekend and do what you can to help Amnesty move this agenda forward. It's so important that this meeting be seen as just the start, as just one step on the journey of human rights work that we care about. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making it such an incredible weekend. And I can't wait to see all of you next year in our AGM. Do I get to say it? Yes. In Southern California. We'll send out location soon. Thank you all for being here. Have a very safe trip home. Take care.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? Is how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever?